What up, YouTube? This is Steven, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I want to talk about something that a subscriber of mine sent to me and asked my opinion on. Alright, so the subscriber goes by the YouTube username Retro Asim. I think that's how you pronounce it. If I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. Alright, so Biracial sent me the following message, and he said and asked the following. I just watched a video Superboy 223 made of Zoe Kravitz, the daughter of Lisa Bonet and Lenny Kravitz. And that's, Mr. Superboy 223. He posts a lot of videos talking about a lot of various topics, including, race topics and racial identity. All right. This I find interesting because both of her parents are biracial. Now, Lisa Bonet has a white mother and a black father, while Lenny Kravitz has a white Jewish father and a black mother. Zoe Kravitz is not really biracial, but she is the product of two biracial parents, which is a little tricky. Could you do a video on this? I'm interested to know what you think, because in this case, Zoe Kravitz is the product of two biracials and not one white and one black parent. All right, and again, another shout out to YouTube user Retro Asim. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. And thank you very much for sending me this topic, and thank you very much for wanting to know my opinion on this topic. I really appreciate that. So let me get into this, all right? Because I do think this is a very interesting topic that is really overlooked when we talk about the Black/African American racial identity. As Retro Asim said, usually when we talk about, biracial people, we're usually talking about people who are the offspring of one white parent and one black parent, as well as just one non-black parent and a black parent. But in this case, we can just stick to black and white, right? And that'll just make it easier. All right. All right. So this is very tricky to me. There's other people who have their opinions, of course, and we all are entitled to our opinions, right? And ultimately, this is just my opinion and how I feel about this. The thing is, though, let's break this down. Okay, we have a black person and another black person come together and create a child. What race would that child be? We would say that child would be black, right? Right? We wouldn't say, oh, that child is like Asian. And two black people came together and made an Asian child. No, we wouldn't say that, right? Okay, let's do this again. We have a white person and another white person come together, create a child together. What race do you think that child would be? I would say white, right? I would say that the child would be white. If I were to place a bet on what the child would be when it comes out, I would say white. I probably wouldn't bet on Native American, Asian, Middle Eastern, etc. Right? I would bet on white, right? Because we have two white people coming together and creating a child. So how could a child be anything other but white, right? All right. Same with the black situation. We have two black people coming together, and how can a child be anything else but black, right? So in this case, we have Zoe Kravitz, and both of her parents are from, I guess, biracial lineage, right? So two biracial people come together and they create a child. What race do you think that child would be? Right? What race do you think you think the child would come out as? Technically, let's talk biologically first, because I know there's like a socio-cultural aspect to race, of course, but there's also a biological aspect as well. Biologically speaking, right? Biracial come together and create an offspring. What do you think that child would be? Do you think that child would be white? We probably wouldn't say that child would be white at all, right? Because we know better. You know, white folks let us know. Y'all ain't getting into this, right? So two biracial people coming together and creating a black offspring, right? You think that would be? You think they would two biracial people coming together creating a black child? You think that would be possible? But then again, it comes down to genetics, I suppose. But biologically speaking, I'm going to say that this child, the offspring, is biracial from a biological perspective. But we know when it comes to race, it's often more so like a socio-cultural, political type of situation, and I think that's where people are coming from more so with this. So in Zoe's case, let's stick to Zoe since that's the best example we have of this at the moment. In Zoe's case, I would say that Zoe is, well, it depends on what her parents identify as, right? Because I feel like the parents play a huge role in, especially the custodial parent, which is usually the mom, but not necessarily the mom all the time, but the custodial parent especially, right? Because I don't know if she was raised with both parents in the house, in the same household. I'm not sure of that situation, right? I would say that Zoe Kravitz is what her parents. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. Well, not backtrack, but let me get my thoughts together just right quick, all right? Because this is a little confusing, but you see, I'm trying to break it down for you one by one, right? Because I know this can get really confusing. That's why well, like I said, I feel like if you are a lighter skinned black person, you need to be coming towards the blackness, right? But see, it's like she tried to go away from the blackness, but then I guess she came back to the blackness, right? See, you see how crazy and mixed up this crap is. All right, let me get it together. Okay. I want to know what race her parents identify as. I want to know what race Lenny Kravitz and Lisa Bonet identify as. That's very important because based on what I'm hearing from this article that was, I guess, posted in a Lore magazine that was picked up by the Huffington Post or whatnot, it said that Zoe Kravitz experienced a big shift in embracing her blackness. You know, she's quoted as saying, "I had the struggle of accepting myself as black and loving that part of myself." That was a quote that came from this, interview that she did with Allure magazine that was picked up by the Huffington Post as well. And she also says, racism is very real and white supremacism is going strong. Let's see. And she goes on to say in this article, "I am definitely mixed. Both my parents are mixed." Okay, so we can say, okay, like I said, biologically, yes, she is mixed, right? I don't think we can really argue with biology, right? It's just, it is what it is, right? Black or white, no pun intended, right? You know how things are usually like black, white, there's not really a gray area a lot of times, right? So yeah, okay. And she also goes on to say, both my parents are mixed, right? Again, so we have two mixed people coming together to create an offspring. So I'm assuming both of her parents possibly identify as mixed. I know both of her parents are biologically mixed, but it's sounding like from this article here that at least one of her parents identifies as mixed slash biracial and not black. Which is, I'm not going to force blackness on anyone, right? Because we as a community, we can't be having it both ways. Like, we can't be mad at biracials and mixed race people for playing the fence when we in the community kind of do something similar to that. When we're like, oh, one minute you're black and the next minute you're biracial. When you are stepping on our feet and taking our opportunities, etc., then you biracial. But then when oh, we need people to come together and support this cause and, come together and, fight the power in the system, then it's like, oh, we black and you black and like that, right? So we have to make a decision on this as well. And she goes on to say, I have white family on both sides, she says. All right. So white family, I feel like that right there says biracial to me, right? From a cultural perspective, right? A socio-cultural perspective, because she is related to white people within the first, or I guess the second generation. Well, white people that are immediate to her, right? She could have white uncles, white aunts, white grandparents, white cousins, and that is something that a black person wouldn't have, right? A black person wouldn't have that. Even a light-skinned black person wouldn't have that, right? When it comes to lighter-skinned people, who I would say are multi-generational mix, right? Because it occurred over like generations back and kind of just came to indirectly, right? Light-skinned people, light-skinned black people generally pretty much don't have a connection with any white like people who were a part of their family at one point or another. Typically, light-skinned people just have a connection with people who are black identified, right? At least black/black identified, right? You know, myself, for instance, I would be considered a light-skinned black person, right? I don't have a connection with any white people, but I have a connection with people who perhaps are like, black identified people who are, who could possibly pass as white, are just other light-skinned black people who are ambiguous, as well as just monoracial black people as well, right? Again, this is not Lisa Bonet's case, because sometimes we do lump biracial people and light-skinned people as the same group, and there are differences. I sometimes do that too, but I do make the distinction when it's necessary to make that distinction. There is a difference between light-skinned and biracial people. I feel that Lisa Bonet would qualify more so as a biracial person because she does have a connection with white people and the white side of her family, right? And as she says, she has a white family on both sides, both her parents' sides of the family, right? So as well, culturally, right, she would perhaps have some sort of care, I guess. I don't know the word I'm trying to think of, but she would have some sort of, she would care about white people, right? While a light-skinned person probably wouldn't care about white people because they're not a part of their family, right? But these white people are a part of her family, and she sees them at like gatherings and family events, and holidays, etc., etc. You know, and then I know some people are going to say, well, isn't a biracial person someone who has a white parent and a black parent, or at least a non-black parent and a black parent, right? And that is one variation of being of a biracial person, right? That is one. However, I say in Lisa Bonet case, it seems like both of her parents may identify as biracial, but if one identified as black and the other identified as biracial, even though they're both biologically biracial, then that would make this even muddier, right? This would make this even more difficult, right? So I guess me personally, I do consider she has two biracial parents. Some people could argue that she would be considered light-skinned, right? But I'm going to say and define light-skin as multi-generational, right? A multi-generational mix that occurred, generations back, right? Hers is not generations back. It's like one generation back. It's not that, she's not that far removed from it, though. That's the thing. So technically, I'm going to say that Lisa, I guess I'm getting the, I'm sorry, I think I got the names confused, the mom and the daughter names confused. I'm sorry, but Zoe Kravitz, right? I'm going to say that she is biracial, okay? Some people are going to have arguments about that, right? It seems like she's leaning towards the black side right now, right? See. She goes on to say in this article, the older I get, the more I experience life. And I'm identifying more and more with being black and what that means. Being more and more proud of that and feeling connected to my roots and my history. Zoe said attending predominantly white schools often made her feel disconnected from her blackness growing up, and that fully embracing her identity was sometimes a struggle. And this happens to not only just biracial, this happens to black people too. Monoracial black people. This does happen when they're kind of like in a white setting, but they're like the only black person on the one of few black people. And they sometimes may feel disconnected from blackness. And sometimes when they get around a group of black people, they may have some sort of a issue, maybe identifying and fitting in with that group because of a cultural difference, right? And I guess this may add to Zoe's, I guess, the way that Zoe racially identifies, or at least identified at one point, right? But let's say this topic is really complex. I'm going to go through it and then ultimately just give my straight-on take on this, all right? But let's say both of her parents identify as biracial, right? But let's say she wants to identify as black. Can she identify as black if both of your parents are biracial? Like, if we had two people who have two black parents, they can't identify as biracial, right? If we have two people who are come from two people who are white and come together and make a child, the child couldn't identify as biracial, right? So two biracial people coming together and making a child, seemingly, it seems like okay, the child is biracial, because we can't have two biracial people come together and create a white child, right? We can't have them come together and make a black child, right? So they would be biracial, but because we're in the system that we're in, seemingly anyone can claim blackness, or at least it seems to be an easier identity to claim than whiteness, right? She know better than to claim whiteness, right? So claiming blackness So do you think that the biracial person, I guess this goes ultimately just goes back and back and back, whether the biracial person is of two uh, parents who are of different races or two biracial parents, right? Does a biracial person have a claim to blackness? I would say they do. Um, Me personally, I would say that the child does have a claim to blackness, right? Um, so I guess it would be, it's, like I said, this is a really complex topic. Um, but let's just try and just cut it down the middle. All right. It seems like Zoe Kravitz is identifying as black, or wants to. Are we going to let her in? Do you think she has the credentials to get in? It seemed like we let both of her parents in, so it would be odd for us not to let Zoe in, right? Um, so ultimately, if Zoe identifies as black, I accept that as well. I think that she does have a look that at least signals some blackness, which I think is very important, to have a look that signals some blackness. So I would accept Zoe as black if I, saw her at the cookout. I wouldn't be like, who's she? I'm like, hey, that's what's up. um, let's say if Zoe wanted to identify as biracial, right? Do you think she has a claim to identify as biracial? Because usually when we think of biracial, again, we think of a white parent and a black parent, but she has two biracial parents. Um, like I said, I don't. It would be a bit odd to have two biracial people coming together and creating anything else but biracial, right? I wouldn't expect them to create a white child. I wouldn't expect them to create a black child, right? So biologically speaking, as I said, she is biracial, right? But does she have a claim to biracialness? I think she does, because she does have a connection to the white family members, right? That's important. She has a connection to white people and whiteness, right? Again, like the light-skinned person doesn't. That's a significant difference, right? The influence of someone white in your family. The influence probably isn't as strong because it's not the parent, but still there is an influence, right? There is an influence there. While the light-skinned person doesn't have that influence, right? So some people would say, oh, she light-skinned, she just light-skinned. But I don't think she's just light-skinned though, because of what I just mentioned, like that the whiteness, right? The white people in her family, they kind of do, to an extent, have some sort of an effect, especially if you have like your parent's parent is white, right? So that is an effect. It might not be as strong, but that's still an effect, right? So I'll say that she is biracial and not light skinned. As well, you can biracial and blackness in this system that we live in aren't mutually exclusive. You can be both, you know. I know some people are going to argue with that, but you can be a biracial person who identifies as black. We've seen that plenty of times already play out, right? J. Cole, right? He's biracial, but he identifies as black. I think Colin Kaepernick, right? He's biracial, but he identifies as black. Jesse Williams, he is biracial, but he identifies as black, right? So we know, like, they aren't exclusive, right? One doesn't cancel out the other. They both coexist, right? Because we know they're all biracial, right? We know that. But they're claiming blackness, right? But they do, if they claim biracialness, then they could do that too. And some people are going to say, well, that's not fair. It seems like they kind of have a choice in racial identity to an extent. Perhaps they do. But in the system we live in, oftentimes it seems like biracial people are forced to sort of claim one side or the other, you know? And usually they're forced to be black, you know? And I personally don't like that because I feel like white people need to take some responsibility in some of the burden when it comes to biracial people. I think they've gotten away far too long, especially white men, want to be deadbeat dads way back in slavery when they didn't want to take care of their offspring and just pawn them off on the black community. We accept it for some reason. Um, so yeah, but I've said a lot of things in this video that may come off as confusing, so I'm going to try and just sum this up as clearly as I can, because this is a very convoluted topic and very complex, but I'm going to really just try to shoot straight, be a straight shooter here. I think in the case of Zoe Kravitz, as well as people like Zoe Kravitz, right? I think ultimately they would be biracial, just a different variation of biracial, right? Not a variation that we're used to, but I think they would be biracial. Do they have a claim to blackness? They do. All right. Just as the typical, typical biracial person has a claim to blackness, they do too. I wouldn't classify Zoe as light skinned. I don't think that would be correct, right? Light skin and biracial, there's a difference. That white influence is the difference, right? Biracial people have a claim to blackness, so Zoe has a claim to blackness. So I guess long story short, Zoe is both biracial and black, just like Colin Kaepernick, J. Cole, and Jesse Williams, etc. Right? Paula Patton, Halle Berry, Barack Obama. But this is why kind of like we do need to start having and enforcing a standard when it comes to who's black and who's not black, right? So we'll know which side of the fence a person is on, right? Some people may have some issues with that because they feel like, oh, that's being divisive. It's not fair to biracial people, etc., right? Perhaps it's not fair, That is an argument that's valid, right? But it's also not fair to us, the black people, right? It's not fair to us either. Because we may feel like people can kind of just jump in and out of our identity when it suits them, right? And we don't want that. We want people to be either you're down with us or you're out. One or the other. You can't be jumping back and forth, right? And it seems like Zoe, at this moment at least, is just trying to claim a black identity. Perhaps she feels like it would get her some more acting roles. Or perhaps she may feel like, okay, this is what people see me as and what people treat me as, so this is what I'll be. Maybe she tried to claim a biracial identity at one point, but it just didn't happen, especially depending on the situation and the area you live in. If you're in a very diverse area, then perhaps, but if you're in like somewhere where it's just like either you're black or you're white, then it's either you're black or you're white, right? So I guess that's my very drawn out opinion about this, right? I think Zoe's both biracial and black. And I think that Zoe has a claim to both biracial and blackness, despite being biracial through biracial people and not through black and one white person, right? The reason I think that is because of the influence of, the white influence. I feel like that's a big factor, right? She has a claim to blackness because she has, black relatives as well, right? She does. So I guess Zoe is sort of like in a situation where she can kind of like lean to one side or the other. So how do we feel about this as the Black community, right? How do we feel? What's our opinion on this, right? Because we have an opinion too. What do we think, right? I think me personally, I'm just gonna let Zoe slide for the moment, just because I don't really see this happening a lot. Usually, when it comes to biracial people, they usually tend to sway either to the black side or to the white side. Um, you know, but I do think they have a right to claim the sway towards the biracial side too. I mean, of course, right? We can't knock them for wanting someone who's just like them, right? But I will say, if you want your child to be seen and want your child to be a part of the Black community and seen as Black, then I really think that you as a biracial person need to sway towards Blackness, right? If perhaps you want a child that is more towards whiteness and wants, perhaps you want a child that is like white, or at least, white passing, lean towards whiteness, right? But perhaps they both wanted a child that was biracial just like them. So where do you lean as a biracial person if you want a biracial child who is exactly like you? You can't lean towards whiteness and you can't lean towards blackness, because you can't, because then you'll just be adding it, just kind of lean towards blackness or lean towards whiteness, the child, right? But it seemed like they may have just wanted a biracial child, so they lean towards biracialness, right? So yeah, Zoe is both biracial and Black. You know, it's a lot goes into how a person racially identifies themselves. In the case of Zoe, me personally, I'm not really tripping on how Zoe identifies herself. As I mentioned before, we can't be forcing Blackness on people. We do have to have a standard for Blackness. Everyone can't be Black. You cannot be Black if, especially, like, no, we had to have some standard, and I've discussed this before in a previous video, a few previous videos actually. We gotta have some standards, right? But notice, like, again, look at white folks. Do white people have this problem? Why? Why do you think that white people don't have this problem? Because they're very strict about who is white and who is not, right? If you're going to be claiming whiteness, you need to look white. You need to look like you can pass as them. Like, you need to look at least white passing, right? And I think we need to try to create a standard, create, some type of criteria, right? But ultimately, I think Zoe can claim either identity. Some people are going to be kind of pissed off about that, but she's just kind of like in a situation where she can kind of sway one way or the other. Me personally, like, if I came on the scene and blew up really big, and folks found out about my racial identity, or I guess my racial background, and I was like, oh, I'm biracial, y'all. What's up? I'm biracial. I got a white dad and a Black mom. But then you come to find, wait a minute, your dad identifies as Black. Your dad is white passing, but identifies as Black. So how are you biracial, right? See what I'm saying? So it's like, I maybe can pass myself off as biracial, but I don't have a claim to it. She has a claim to it, right? But let me bring this video to a close, because I feel like I could go on for a little bit longer on this, but I feel like I probably should just bring this video to a close. To make a long story short, Zoe Kravitz is biracial. Biologically, but she does have a claim to Blackness on the socio-cultural, political level, and she may be leaning towards that based on how she responded in the article that I read. Let's see. Let's see. Let me read the rest of this. It's not too long. It's been really interesting. Let's see. It's been a really interesting journey because I was always one of the only black kids in any of my schools, she said. I went to private school full of white kids. A lot of them made me want to blend in or not be looked at as black. Yeah. That happens with monoracial black people too, as well as just other groups of people in general, right? The white kids are always talking about your hair and making you feel weird, right? White people do that. White people do either subconsciously or consciously remind black people that they're black, biracial people that they're black. I see you. It's kind of like you're black, right? You're different. In this case, you're black, right? They do that. Let's see. I had the struggle of accepting myself as black and loving that part of myself. My throat is itchy. Right. I had the struggle of accepting myself as black and loving that part of myself. Zoe said she has since evolved and experienced a big shift in her life that has led her to fully embrace her identity and take pride in being black, which she said especially means a lot to her father, who is no stranger to unapologetic expression. Okay, so it seems like maybe she's telling that her father, maybe Lenny Kravitz, does identify as black. She may have had the influence of her mom. And her mom, right, like I said, the custodial parent, usually the mom, influencing the child's racial identity, right? So she may have influenced her child to take on a biracial identity initially, right? However, her father may have wanted her to take on a black identity, right? Because Lenny Kravitz does kind of have like a black look to him, even though he's biracial. So he may be in a situation where he's just like, okay, just identify as black. It'll make your life easier. It'll make things less complicated for you. Now I'm so in love with my culture and so proud to be black, she said. It's still ongoing, but a big shift has occurred. My dad especially has always been very connected to his history, and it's important to him that I understand where I come from. And that's the end of the article, pretty much, or at least Huffington Post article of it. But yeah, I'm glad I did read that, the rest of that. So it seems like her dad seems to identify as black. But right, the mom, right, the custodial parents influence, right? As I mentioned in previous videos, the custodial parent, a lot of times when it comes to biracial people who are have one black parent and one white parent, that white mom, if they have a white mom, they're probably more likely to identify as biracial versus like black, right? Of course, it can happen with black moms too, but seemingly more with white moms, right? So in this case, it seemed like Zoe has, I guess, technically a black identified parent and a biracial identified parent. But both of her parents are biracial though. And both of her parents have white family members. But I'm still going to say she's biracial with a claim to blackness, all right? Do we as a community want to accept her? Are we going to accept her? Because we got a say in this too. This is our community. We have a say in who comes in and who does not come in, right? So what do you guys think? Feel free to let me know. Feel free to comment. Feel free to subscribe. Feel free to thumbs up. I really appreciate the comments, the feedback, and the support. And thank you very much. Until the next video, stay black. What else I can say? Keep black unity in the community. There you go. All right. Take care.